So something in the discourse recently has been returning manly jobs to mainly America, and that is making, I guess, adult men work in factories or work on like oil rigs or oil fields and shit like that. It's really funny to see a lot of people who've never worked manual labor jobs like talk about how they'd love it over a corporate office job. And I'm not denying that corporate life isn't soul destroying and corporate jobs are terrible for your mental health and also your physical health. And I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the reality. I want to talk about like why not as many men do this anymore in America, like why manly men don't all work in factories. It's because obviously capitalists love cheap labor. So starting in the 80s, they obviously moved like most jobs abroad to places like China and cheaper countries to exploit poor labor. And also how the US standard of living and consumer economy is built on Americans not doing these jobs to get them for cheap, because if they all did these jobs, then you wouldn't get cheap consumer goods as much. So all of that coming up for you today. After you've got through the video, maybe leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe. Also check me out on social media at the Kavernacle on Blue Sky and on Instagram. And also, if you want to support me, check out my YouTube memberships and check out my Patreon page. So let's just jump straight into it. I want to talk about this video. So I saw this going viral when I went on Twitter to grab something else the other day, and I was just laughing at the belief that anyone would want to fucking do a job like this. So the video is of a guy, I don't even know what he's really doing. He's having to really physically like tighten something with a wrench, I guess. And judging by the username, Base Jigs Oil Rigs, it's on an oil rig. So watch the video and ask yourself while watching it, do you want to do this? And in terms of jobs that you might not like but have to do, might be jobs you've had in your life, would you prefer doing what this man is doing? For any of you watching that, would you love to roast alive in the hot sun, probably in a desert somewhere in America, putting in maximum energy to tighten something or loosen something, working in an oil field? I'm guessing most people wouldn't like to do that every single day. And a lot of these like oil shifts, they often do them in massive chunks where you're just working on for like days on end and then having a longer break. Would you like to do that? I definitely watched that thinking, that looks really tiring, because that guy is big and he's clearly putting a lot of effort in. He's probably sweating his guts out, and I just don't want to do that in my life. Let's say this was a vital industry, and for the moment, oil is a vital industry. Obviously, we should move away from oil because burning oil destroys the planet, but let's say for now it's a necessary evil. What you'd want, if this job has to be done by a human being, is he's not doing that regularly. That there are lots of people doing the same job, but that makes no sense in the capitalist economy. You want as little people doing this job, and you want to burn the individual out doing it for as cheap as possible. Because in an ideal world, if we live in like a socialist or communist world, first of all, like a robot should be doing that. But if a human has to do it, you'd have loads of people doing this job, and they could like take it in turns, different shifts. You'd have as many people working it. If it was so vital to just the survival of the human race, like maybe oil is right now, then you'd get people doing this so they wouldn't destroy their bodies doing really hard shit like this. And that goes for like lots of manual labor. If manual labor, construction labor, all this stuff has to be done, you'd want as much regulation as possible, and you want as much kind of focus on alleviating the pain, long-term pain these jobs cause, by hiring as many people as possible. But when you live in a totally profit-driven world, even industries that you need are obviously not going to take that into account. So what happens when people do manual labor is they just destroy their bodies. So when they get to an old age, they just can't really function as well anymore. Now, this video was posted by a guy called 9mm SMG who says, while it has obvious downsides, I'd take this over a cubicle and office chit-chat 100%. No man that has ever worked a job this hard has uttered that sentence. The guy responding, I spent a lot of my life lifting heavy weights for fun. I've worked manual labour and have been subjected to office politics for the same money. I'd take the labour. The real downside is when you get older. Maybe labour when you're young, retire to the office. Someone replying, then go back to the fields instead of tweeting. You sound like a 9 to 5. I retired when COVID hit. No need. Then why are you jerking to this? I did grunt work for years. Now I very much prefer sitting at my desk, shit posting and still having my fingers. I can't do office banter. That guy is a conservative. And the thing is, there is nothing wrong with preferring manual labour jobs to office jobs. Like, seriously, if you prefer it, then that's fine. I know people who've worked both. And I know people who have gone from working in corporate jobs to becoming like plumbers or electricians. But I think there's a difference to being like a manual labourer in certain capacities and let's say being like someone who makes houses. Like most of my male relatives have worked in manual labour jobs like making houses, carpentry, construction, plumbing, all these things where you're working with your hands and you don't go to further education for. And a lot of them would say they prefer it. But also a lot of them would say it's very, very hard. It's hard on your body. I know a lot of them have severe health problems now because of it. And you wouldn't recommend doing it in the way that it's being done. You might like being outdoors. You might like the culture. You might like the friendship you might get there. And I tease a couple of my friends who work for their like dad's construction company. I'm like, you two are probably just like sitting about drinking beer all day. Because there is that element of freedom sometimes when you're working in an environment you like maybe for your dad or for your uncle, at a company run by a family you know, there is a more chilled vibe. At the same time, there are construction places and just general places that have terrible management that will happily work you to the bone and you'll destroy your physical body for someone else's profit and there'll be no care for your physical health. And in a place like America where healthcare isn't free, I always find lionizing these types of jobs like wild. But you might have seen this other one going viral. This has been going viral for years. It's a guy at an oil rig as well. But it's going viral because of his beard and his chain that make it a massive safety risk. But loads of people obviously have recognised that whenever something like this goes viral, it's just conservatives talking about how awesome it is. There was even a question on No Stupid Questions recently. Why does every top comment on every oil rig worker YouTube video have to be, you don't see women doing this job? There is a real element of toxic masculinity associated with these jobs. And I wouldn't even say it's necessarily relegated to like the political right, because you see a lot of left-wing people, wrongly, and communists as well. They often say like, oh, the working class is white day labourers only. And that's the only workers that matter. So they focus on that. Like working class, day labourers, construction workers, plumbers, all that stuff. That's the working class. Whereas people who work in offices, even for shit money, even if you're like, for example, in I think London, I think the poorest demographic of worker is like black women, right? So if you're a black woman doing a manual labour job, to a lot of even leftist men, that's not the working class. It's all about the white working class day labourers. So you see how much even with both sides of the political spectrum, this like toxic masculinity is tied into these jobs where they are always the focus of these political groups. And yeah, they often do a lot of jobs we need for people to survive, but they are heavily male dominated industries and we associate a lot of it with manliness because they are physically demanding jobs, where if you work in an office, you're probably like some college educated sissy, I guess, according to these people. But what's been wild recently is, although that is implicit in society for a long, long time, the US are now ramping this rhetoric up to try and like wage a propaganda campaign about bringing back manufacturing jobs to the US. So this has been going on for months, but I'll just read this article from the Irish Star. Fox News host bizarrely praises Trump's manly tariffs. Two Fox News hosts have bizarrely praised Donald Trump's trade tariffs as the thing needed to bring the masculinity of America's workforce. According to the host, masculinity will rise due to the fact that jobs and factories will come roaring back to the US as a result of these tariffs. Jesse Waters, one of the co-hosts of the show, endorsed the argument, saying, "When you sit behind a screen all day, it makes you a woman. Studies have shown this. And if you're out working building robots like Harold Ford Jr., you are around other guys. You're not around HR ladies and lawyers, and that gives you estrogen." Waters' unfounded and unsupported claims came one day after the Free Press columnist Batya Ungar Sargon discussed the crisis in masculinity that the tariffs could alleviate. It's not just the destruction of the economic vitality of the working class, she said on Fox and Friends. "We ship jobs that gave men who work with their hands for a living and rely on brawn and physicality off to other countries to build up their middle class," probably talking about China. We imported millions and millions of illegals to work in construction, manufacturing, landscaping, jobs that used to give men access to the American dream. Milo Yiannopoulos led the discourse on Twitter, claiming a mass return to factory work will be more rewarding for America's men than the current knowledge-based economy. He wrote, "Men are depressed and addicted and broken because they have nothing to do. They get no stimulation or satisfaction from BS email jobs. I'm telling you, white Americans will love working in factories again, making things in the image and likeness of God the Maker." Before we get a bit more into the reality of working in a factory that someone wrote a really good article about, let's just talk about the economics. So they're saying that because of Trump's tariffs, people want to make goods domestically in America. His tariff trade war on China and other places. That simply isn't happening on one level. But let's say it did happen. Let's say manufacturing jobs came back to America. So a lot of the consumer products in America would be made at home. And they're talking about how illegals have stolen all the jobs. So let's say it's American citizens, maybe even white American conservative men, all getting factory jobs. So you're going to have to pay them more. And that means you're very likely to sell the goods for even more than they are. Capitalists, despite trade tariffs, are not going to do that. And that's the reason they do employ so many people with unsettled immigration status, because they can both use that to keep them in line and have it over their head the whole time, but also underpay them because they know if they were only employing like US citizens, they'd have to pay them the minimum wage in their state. They employ migrants and migrants who don't have citizenship in these jobs for those reasons, and they moved all these jobs overseas for these reasons. And Americans benefit because you get consumer goods for cheaper. Living in the heart of the capitalist empire, that's the benefits you get. And it's the same in the UK as well. You get cheap access to consumer goods because they are made in foreign countries for lower wages. So that keeps the profit margins for these companies high. And that was the incentive for them to leave in the first place. So if you told most Americans, yeah, we're going to bring back all the jobs, but you will pay 50% more for your consumer goods, depending on what industry, do you think most of them would like it? Do you think most conservatives would like it? Some might pay lip service saying, yeah, it's better that way. But we all know that is not going to happen. It's funny conservatives are talking about this when it's your ideology, your for-profit ideology, which if you follow it to its conclusion, why the fuck wouldn't you do this? Like, why would you stay in America and even face the, consequences of maybe these groups unionizing, so you have to pay them more and offer them more benefits? Why would you do that when you can go to a poorer country, not have to worry about that, and you can make more money? It just doesn't make any sense. But let's talk about just like manual labor. So we said some people do like doing manual labor better, but we still have a concept of manual labor in the UK and the US that is more about like building shit or working with your hands, like I said, a plumber or electrician. We don't think about it as much as working in a factory. Obviously, loads of people in Western countries do work in factories, but that's not the notion we have. And most of us don't really think about it. Like, even with manual labor, we think more of like an Amazon warehouse than a factory. But this author, Franklin Schneider, he worked in a factory and he wrote a really interesting article. I can't relate. I've never worked in a factory. The most manual labor job I've done is a security guard at a rugby stadium and working in like a stock room at a rugby stadium's like clothes store. Definitely haven't been anywhere near working in a factory. Do Americans actually want these jobs back? Some think they do, but that's only because most of them don't know any better. Unfortunately, I do. I worked in a factory once. To this day, it remains one of the worst experiences I've ever endured. Believe me, if more people knew what it's like to work at these jobs, they wouldn't be so eager to return to them. I took the job at an Iowa cookie factory in the late 90s at my parents' insistence. My father had grown up on a farm and my mother had worked in a factory in Korea in her teens. They both subscribed to a parenting philosophy that believed the best way to prepare a child for the world was to forcibly expose them to the very worst parts of it. A factory is a space of monumental proportions, built to accommodate machines instead of humans. The noise is like being at the center of a perpetual explosion. With its concrete surfaces, security guards, and perimeter of chain link fences, hundreds of workers in matching coveralls shuffling along a path painted on the floor, it felt more like a prison than a workplace. I'd expected that working in a factory would be boring, and it was. What I discovered in a factory is you experience a strain of boredom that's uniquely crushing. If you're sitting in line at a DMV without your phone, you might be bored, but your mind is unconstrained. Even at the dreariest office job, you can click away from the spreadsheet, go for a coffee or cigarette, or lean over and ask your cubicle neighbour if they saw the game. On the factory line, you are bored, but your mind is not your own. You have no control over the pace of your work or the direction of your attention. You are fully controlled by the machine. If your mind drifted or broke free for an instant, you soon heard the heavy ka-chunk of the line auto-stopping and the bell, and off you scampered with a handful of cookies. In a different sort of factory, you might be pulled back from your momentary reverie by having your finger or arm severed. And I like this part. So my experience wasn't unusual. From the beginning, Americans hated working in factories. In his book, Behemoth, A History of the Factory and the Making of the Modern World, history professor Joshua Freeman quotes early Ford workers who say they're going to break under the strain of working on the line. They called the state of nervous exhaustion that afflicted line workers Forditis. Factory work was so distasteful that many people quit after a very short time. In 1913, the first year that Ford operated his famous assembly line, the turnover rate was a ludicrous 370%. That is, they had to hire nearly 52,000 workers to maintain a force of 14,000. An internal Ford report found that 71% of employees who quit didn't even give notice, they just stopped showing up. So that is a good reminder that people have hated capitalism for a long time and people have hated working for a long time. And if you think about 1913 compared to now, like what were the options for people to work? They weren't as large as people today and there weren't as many opportunities. So even with that hanging over their head, they still quit and they still just didn't show up to work again because it made them so depressed. And obviously not all manufacturing jobs are like this, but if you're working in a factory to help with this consumer products being sold to Americans, a lot of Americans would have to do that work. It can be dangerous, bad for your health, and in the actual article he talks about how pretty much every single person he worked with had a substance abuse problem, whether that be alcohol, but he said it was more about people on drugs all the time. And there's a reason so many people have hated industrialization, and there were so many people who hated it at the time, is because it forced humans into these factories to spend their lives and to give their lives in the service of what? Making your country great? No, these weren't socialist countries. These weren't communist countries. It was all in the service of profit. They designed a system where you had to basically be a slave in these factories to make money to live. And you had to work there like 6 days a week. And you had to work there like over 12 hours a day. That was life. Is that life? No. And people have always realized it. And I guess as Westerners, we often forget how lucky we are that we do have these options. As bad as our countries are, and they're getting worse, there are options for us. We comparatively have good schools, good healthcare, good wages, and a good quality of life. It is getting worse, and that doesn't mean you shouldn't demand more, because you always should, and that we should be fighting for something better than what we have. But it's a reminder that you don't want these jobs, and you also, as Americans generally, don't want these jobs to go to more Americans, because if you're being purely selfish, your consumer products prices will go way, way up if more of it is made at home. But fundamentally, these jobs are the most soul destroying. Part of the benefit of moving them all overseas was it allowed the US government to destroy union movements, but it also allowed Americans to forget how a lot of their shit is made and how brutally it is made by a lot of the world. And it's the same in the UK as well, because we did the exact same shit with Margaret Thatcher. I appreciate everyone who does the manual labour that is necessary for our world. And I just wish we would not glorify it as something that manly men should do. Instead, recognise that these are very hard jobs and we shouldn't live in a for-profit system. So we can have as many people as possible work these jobs to alleviate the strain until we have created like robots to do it for us and hopefully minimise this physical toil that will leave permanent damage to a lot of people. But anyway, I just want to talk about that because I've been seeing this going viral for a long time. But that is it for the video. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.